Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome back, and I'm not the star of the show this afternoon, obviously. We're here to be honoured to listen to Shaykh Abdal Wudud with his latest
This is a Cambridge insect here?
episode.
CMC
Lincolnshire, I think.
Oh, Lincolnshire. I brought it with me, did I?
So, as Alia was saying, we're going to hand the floor over now to Abdul Wudud, who will be reading some highlights of his latest anthology, after which we'll probably have a conversation.
Okay, thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for inviting me. You see the picture of Sheikh Nazim Al-Akani. I passed away in 2014. Allah bless his soul. These poems and short prose pieces are inspired by my encounters with him and my experiences in Cyprus, North Cyprus, Lefka, Derna, the mountains, the landscapes, very much the people. I'm very interested in the people around the Sheikh as well, and showing how it was kind of, he was a center of something like a community, even an ecology. I don't really know where to begin, but you know, even watching my Sheikh, I noticed how he did little things differently, how he started to put his finger up when he was drinking a glass of water, just like this, the one. And so I noticed that, and this is a poem, My Sheikh in Water. Seated, his right hand surrounds a glass, one straight finger raised towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He hands on the water to his followers. He didn't, in the past, point toward heaven when taking a sip, but now he does, finding new ways to worship, to better remember in each act his Lord. Each Jummah, after talk, he passes on spring clear fluid he has touched, and some take a sip and others down it whole. I read this in the car coming down, and it's one of the poems that I can particularly say is about the Sheikh and me. It's called A Cure for Hay Fever. And I use the metaphor, a cure for hay fever is words from Sheikh Nazim for cure. Eating grapefruit is a cure for hay fever, he said. And I saw this grapefruit, and it became a kind of symbol for me of the relationship between the Sheikh and his followers. Are we going to dive into that fruit, or are we always going to stay on the surface? Are we going to risk opening it and going in, or are we going to be satisfied with this ornament? No doubt precious, but it's a kind of challenge to go just that little bit further, you know, to spend just that little bit longer with your prayers, with your worship, with your commitment, just going that little bit inward. On the warped board, a cypress grapefruit, you clutch with your hands, rub its cheeks, not yet wanting to taste this blessed gift from the Sheikh, its tropical scent. Deep or thin covered, your thumb stroking its gold yellow pitted skin. You refuse to plunge inside. Let it stay a rescued ornament, moon bright, surface cratered, a soft scar face. You imagine attacks it endured in a walled exile's garden, quaking with others on the same ropey branches. Hurricane flailed, it kept its outward crust, never fell and burst. You idle, longing to know whose grip brought it down before reaching yours. I should say the follower is me. Did I have the courage to go further? Or did I think I was holy enough already? Did I think I knew enough already? I once wrote a book called The Holy Week Sequence when I was a Christian, and I sent it to these nuns. And they said, we're holy enough, we don't need anything more. It's interesting, isn't it? Muhammad ﷺ never accepted that. He never thought there wasn't a day he couldn't learn more about Allah's love, the mystery of creation. This is my wife's favorite poem. She couldn't be with us today, so I always like reading it. It came about in a very secular way. I was commissioned by Lincolnshire County Council to walk through the county and write about whatever I saw. And on the 7th day, I saw this scarecrow. I was a Muslim by then, back in 2007. And I asked the scarecrow if it could tell me about the beloved. There it is, that shape out in the field like this, rocking. It's cold, windy, big straw face. And I said, okay, tell me about the beloved. The beloved is an interesting term because you can use it in Islam, you can use it in Christianity, Judaism, many forms. The beloved. I have to admit, I did imagine what it said. I ask a scarecrow to speak, if it can, about the beloved. It turns its straw head and says, beyond what pain is ununderstandable, no further torture exists, not burning bars, but the beloved's arms ready to welcome. Be confused, who's beloved, who's you? Can't separate, then accept. Be bewildered, a holy state, the blessedness that follows grief. The beloved is already approaching to hold you between sense and nonsense. Be empty, as my straw legs and head, easily on fire. Give up on reason. Don't fantasize you can outsmart the Eternal One, or keep your individual pursuits. The beloved will use you like a rag to change the world you now despise. What's beyond indiscernible sorrow is love. Sniff it when you see the blank wall bloom. Don't try to name it rose or jasmine, just say you over and over to the beloved. This is one of the first poems I wrote in Cyprus, just after my wife and I got married, 2004. Got married by Sheikh Nazim. Sheikh Nazim said, what's your name? You're Abdul Wudud. I couldn't pronounce Abdul Wudud, so he said, let's call you Ibrahim. I couldn't pronounce Ibrahim either, so I just gave up after that. I can't believe how naive I was in my coat and you know, like most times when people get married, they send out receptions, invitations, months in advance, in gold and silver, in purple, putting to shame the emperor of Constantinople even. But we didn't know when our wedding night was going to be. He would say, oh, maybe tomorrow night. After Isha, tomorrow night. Oh, okay, then it wasn't. And then, of course, I had to become a Muslim. He didn't say I had to become a Muslim, but I did, of course, have to become a Muslim. So that had to happen. Then I had to have a name. And then gradually, yes, tonight. So on our honeymoon, we came to a place called the Mosque of the Seven Companions. Now, during the Greek period of time, when they ran the island in the north, it was just an accommodation, just a residence. The Turkish army invaded in 1974. It was restored back to a mosque. And it celebrates the seven companions who, when they passed away, the world was a different place. A place where Christianity, in my opinion, had lost its way and had made Jesus into a creator. The seven companions, when they came back, found that God was recognized as one again. And so this mosque or maqam celebrates the seven companions. It's quite a dark, small place beside the Mediterranean Sea, and the waves crash against the wall and throw up their spray over the mosque almost. And in that space, I can't describe it to you, how something was happening more than the words on the page. You know how Rumi always says, these are only words at the end of his poems? These are only words. I hope these words bring you somewhere into that atmosphere of what we felt. Inside Hazrat Omar Mosque, you, 25 years a covered Muslim, and I, 5 days from my Shahada, submit before the tall green alcove, its unfigured hollow topped with calligraphy you wish you could read. The Mediterranean's cadences sound through beats of thought. Breakers could snarl and hurl storm froth on the shelter's roof, yet no weather mood can perturb seven green turbaned saints inside. When, from 8 centuries of warring empires, Ottoman foot soldiers ducked into a cave and chanced on laid out unaged bodies of 7 companions, they appeared no more than children, cuddling for warmth, ready to awake. The mosque's far-eyed attendant collects for the abstract border, shaddada we buy. Then, off-duty, discreetly steps out and taking a rod, casts for what he might discover in rolling turquoise brilliance. In darkness, I see unknown mountains, enveloped with evergreens, curl towards 7 bare stone summits, each wrapped in unwarpable brilliance. You, standing close by, recite Arabic, Yasin. Slow, that cosmic prayer molds the shore rocks of our grief and love. This is called forgiveness. There's little... How are we doing for time, Sheikh?
5 minutes.
The danger is always thinking that because I'm standing up here now reciting this, that I'm a great person. I am not a great person. I struggle with everything that you struggle with, and perhaps even more deeply. And this is about when I was in a mood. How can you be in a mood with your sheikh, like Sheikh Nazim? I was in a mood. And I came into the Durga grumpy because so many people were there before me. So I wouldn't be able to get close to the sheikh. What a pathetic character. So this very gentle man from India, who I vaguely knew, said, "Sure, you can sit close to me, that's fine." Forgiveness. Why should a holy man want to see a worm like me? I call him here. I can't face calling him me. Like him. Full of contention. A.W., that's me, Abdul Wudud, concluded, the newly arrived, in the small Sufi mosque or durga, where Maulana, past 90 years of age, would make his weekly appearance. The turbaned, prayer-hatted brothers were already gathering. Many had slept there, rising for night prayers, then Fajr. Now they prepared for Jummah. Their rolled sleeping bags stashed in various back corners. Abdul Wudud saw an old young friend, almost forgotten, near the front where Maulana would sit in his wooden chair, floral and upholstered. A.W. softened. He asked if he could join him. The beautiful-faced youth from a subcontinent background, more British than Abdul Wudud, smiled a pleasurable yes. When Maulana arrived about half an hour later, more than once the aged Sufi master gazed at his weak servant, Abdul Wudud, at his malcontent, and touched his heart and mind without forcing a confession. The deep eyes in the sheikh's slumped face, full of power and humility, struck Abdul Wudud, and only then did he accept or believe he'd entered Shaykh Effendi's realm. With little fanfare, the night traveler had arrived. May Allah forgive me, forgive them, forgive us. I'm going to read just one more. I love playing with children, going places with them. And in Cyprus, I was playing with his brother and sister on the shore, playing hide and seek amongst these great eucalyptus trees. And suddenly I looked out into the water and I had an imagination that I saw Sheikh Nazim there on a boulder with all the water around him. He wasn't attached to the land, he was out there on his own. So I wrote about that. Between Tidelines. A boy and his young sister and I struggled between tidelines on a North Cypriot out-of-season beach. Pebbles and rotund stones and skimmers had been tossed in heaps. With each step, our shoes dug in, more than half astride. We played hide and seek among surf-edged eucalyptus. With closed eyes, I counted where the two siblings sought a good hiding place. They crouched behind the boldest trunk, with initials carved high and low in its too tender bark. Neither made it home free. In no time, I spied them. Light dulled, the foreshore moaned, pebbles were muscled up the beach, then forced back into the next wave's inrush. With each blue turquoise turning a white, hissing, I saw perched on a sea-ringed boulder my old sheikh, his green turban riffled, his spring juba buttoned to the chin. At the core, of his world cuddling love, he sat in seclusion. I gave distant salams and pictured an ocean in an ocean.
It might be interesting if we begin this conversation, Abdul Wudud, with one of the things that we were trying to understand from Imam al-Ghazali this morning, which is the enigma and the miracle of speech. We're dealing with a book which is called The Defects of the Tongue, in which he says some things about how it is that so much changes for better or for worse just through the exercise of this little sort of squishy muscle that we find in our mouths, and yet so much of the mystery of what's usually veiled, the thoughts, perceptions, emotions of the soul, can be conveyed to the outside world, sometimes quite profoundly by the tongue, so that we can listen to a Shakespeare play and somehow his message still affects us simply through these words in the air or on a page. And he presents that as a kind of divine mystery. So I wonder if you would have anything to say as somebody who is actually, as it were, an expert mouthpiece for the states of the soul. To what extent does the tongue, words, letters, vowels, consonants, authentically represent a moment or an experience, perhaps a very subtle one? To what extent do you trust your power of speech in conveying something precious and unique to a reader who you may never meet?
One of the things I love about the Quran is where it begins with just sounds. Al, Lam, Sa. Because I can imagine that we have the articulation, but we have to continually return to the source that's wordless. And there's some sort of sincerity involved in that. And what is criminal is when words are used to hurt and mislead people. Because the speaker is not going back to that source. The speaker has an agenda. And I feel as a poet, I can't have an agenda. I have to keep going back to some place where the words are fermenting. They're not yet words. And they may never become words. Some place in me. I remember when someone once said to me, when I was debating with them, discussing with them, and they said, well, I can only think in words. And I thought, well, I don't always think in words. Something else happens. And that's what I seek. And I think when Rumi says at the end of a poem, these are only words, he means ultimately we have to dive into that space where words come from. And that is a great challenge to us. That's the silence, isn't it? That's the silence that we cherish so much when we land on it, that peace, that, oh, I don't need to express this, it's just whole in itself. It's complete. It can't be expressed, it can only be approached, as it were. Words approximate this experience. And without that experience, I assure you, without that experience, I would never write. I know I would never write. If it wasn't for the moment where words just are not enough. So there's a struggle to try to make those words approach it. And I think that doesn't happen overnight. I think sometimes that takes a lot of work, We've got going back to something and rewriting because it's an editing process as well. And that's one of the hardest things for me to come to terms with. The mystery is that you can receive an inspiration, get a lovely phrase, but still the work's there to make it into something more. You know, to complete it, to make it
Yep.
a presentable from the private into the public space somehow. It has to go through some kind of refining process.
And to what extent is that refining process still part of the original, as you say, almost passive and receptive moment of inspiration? Or is it a different part of the mind and the consciousness?
It's a very good question. And actually, at times in the past, I've actually taken out an inspiration because I couldn't understand it. I never do that again. If I don't understand something afterwards, I keep it in. I believe in the inspiration. If I don't understand it, because I'm on this level of consciousness, when I was inspired, I was slightly on a different level. I was slightly more open to something, and now I trust that. I won't take it out, even if I don't understand it. I think it's a wisdom that's there that's beyond my rational mind. Like there's aspects of the poem of a cure for hay fever that I don't really understand anymore exactly what that means, that Scarface. You know, there's a film called Scarface. I seem to be drawing on the idea that this grapefruit is all scarred, you know, from encounters and everything else, but I can't quite get back to that inspiration. But then should I cut it out? What do you think? Do you think I should cut it out if I don't understand it afterwards?
So when you feel a poem is finished, is that because you've reached the point at which you think the editing process is taking on a life of its own rather than simply clarifying the original moment?
Could be. One poet said, poems aren't finished, they're just abandoned. I kind of believe that. Because when I go back, you can see how, oh, well, maybe that wasn't quite right, or you stole that off someone. That's the one that you don't like to discover. It's really delicate. I sometimes, when I'm in doubt, I try to go back to the original experience as much as I possibly can that inspired the poem, and see what more I can glean from it or what I can correct from it. But you're right, you can sort of go off too far, and I have to check myself at times, definitely, yeah.
Which presumably means that the editing shouldn't take place too long after the original moment.
It should mean that, but there's poems that I've written that I never got published for 30 years after I wrote them. I worked on them off and on over that period. Some of these are fairly old as well. I don't know.
And the original moment, can it be invited, or is it a purely passive reception?
No, you can work towards it. When I was younger, I thought, I waited for inspiration, and there's a great story about Rilke, the poet, Rainer Maria Rilke, the German poet, 20th century German poet. He was the secretary of Rodin, the sculptor, French sculptor, you know. Am I pronouncing the name right?
Rodin, I guess.
Rodin. And one day Rodin saw Rilke moping around. He said, "What's the matter?" "I'm waiting for inspiration," he said. Rilke said, "I'm waiting for inspiration." And Rodin, he got very angry. "You don't wait for inspiration?" So he sent him down to the zoo in Paris. And he sat there, Rilke, watching a panther till he could write about it. So I think that's what's happened to me, and I was saying this in the car coming down, is that gradually it's become a habit. It's become part of a routine, in a way, to just think, I'm a writer. And I'm going to take the time to be inspired. I'm going to take the time to be receptive. I'm going to be receptive. One writer said to me, observe, observe, observe. Keep observing. all the time. But I think you have to, I have to make an effort. I have to really... You see, when I was young, when I was a child, I was a toddler, my grandfather recited poetry to me. I was less than 4 years of old, and I was playing in his basement where he was a cabinet maker, where he was making furniture. But he was reciting to me Marmion at the Bridge, The Lady of Shalott, Lady of the Lake by Sir Walter Scott. You may not know some of these, but you probably know the Pied Piper of Hamelin, don't you, where all the children are chased away by the Pied Piper, who chases away the rats, and when they don't pay him, he chases away the children. You probably know that, don't you? He legitimized poetry for me. He showed me that it was worthwhile and valuable and acceptable to spend time writing poetry. And that's very important to me, to just know I have to do that, and that's something okay to do, you know. So that to me is where the sort of discipline comes into the passiveness. I have to make that effort. I have to put that time aside. I can't just think, oh, I can do this, and poetry will come along. No, no, no.
It's like language itself. You have to be disciplined in order to say anything coherent. It's part of the process of communication itself.
And I think that's one of the wonderful things of Islam and the Quran and the pen, writing, you know, all this connection between and how Sufis love poetry, and the word, and for us, yes, there's the discipline involved. Yet I loved hearing what children have to say as well. But it's interesting with children, you can't ask them to write a theory. They come up with wonderful statements, but they can't create the whole. And I think that's the job, kind of the job of the adult, is to take those momentary inspirations, those wonderful insights, and make them into something more that a person can receive, that the public can receive in some way.
Yep.
But there's probably a compromise in that as well, isn't there? But some poets don't compromise very much. Others compromise, I think, a lot more.
Yep. One of the things we were grappling with this morning again was the immediacy of the child's perception of the wonder of the world, and the extent to which a spiritual life is a kind of rolling back of the years so that we can have a sense of the integrity of the now and be inspired by that, and the extent to which modernity, by subtracting us from the natural world in particular through technologies and haste, actually makes that process of returning to what we used to be harder. And I've always noticed in your poetry that nature is an inspiration, and we've just heard the Scarecrow poem and the Miles of Lincolnshire.
That's absolutely true.
To what extent do you think we are blunted and stunted by the fact that nature is being...
We definitely are. We can just see it, you know, all the time, just nature being closed up. And how do you get there? And, you know, the paths that used to be open, farmers even are trying to plow them in. You know, we have to fight for the rights of way that that a previous generation had won, you know. Absolutely. I mean, when I was, again, young, for some reason, I just had this instinct. It came a lot out of rebellion, but this instinct to go out into nature. And I must have absolutely driven my parents to the state of distraction, because I would just go out at midnight and not come back to 4 o'clock in the morning. I would just walk and walk and walk, you know. As a teenager, I would go through the woods and just keep walking. And when I had a job in an intensive care unit in a hospital in intensive care as an orderly, sometimes I'd be on the night shift and I'd come out at 11 a.m. and it had been snowing all day, and I just couldn't go home. I just couldn't go back. I just had to walk out into the country in this deep, deep snow and connect with a deserted railway line. And one time I did that, and I came back, and I fell into a snowdrift up to my neck. And I watched a rabbit bound across in front of me. on my level. And I was on his level. And leaves, beautiful brown, like little miniature cellos dancing across. I mean, these things never leave you.
Yep.
And they are from nature, you know. And when I lived on Fair Isle, I scared the people I lived with there. Astaghfirullah, I scared so many people in my life. Because I just sat on these rocks and watched the ocean bash below me, you know. But for the grace of God, really. But you could be killed so many times, you know. How do you know, I really felt, Sheikh, that I had a tendency to want to push myself to a limit in nature and then struggle to get back. Struggle to return to the valley, you know. Climb and press to that cliff edge and then make the great effort to come back. And these were very inspiring moments for me to sort of break through some kind of fear, some kind of inhibition about nature. And I think some of that is imposed. I think some of it's imposed by modernity and by city life and by security and all these things. I think some of it's imposed.
But Canadians must have a natural advantage because you have so much nature. I remember.
Yeah, it's just sad though. So many Canadians live in cities, you know, it's like...
Yes, but England is basically one large city with a few bits of intensive agriculture in between.
Oh, no, it's just terrible, isn't it?
I recall once in Canada when I was about 16, stepping out of my aunt's little cottage north of Toronto. I'll go for a walk. But then I realised that these trees probably went on to the Hudson Bay and beyond, and there were bears and caribou, and it was, I felt myself recalibrating.
And rattlesnakes as well.
No, I didn't. Thankfully, I didn't realise that. But it is a different kind of experience to what we have in England, where everything is so municipalised, and I think it's probably harder if you're walking through a little park to be inspired by a few tame ducks on the pond. It has to be virgin nature, doesn't it? That seems to help. Or doesn't it matter so much? Is nature just nature?
I think as I got older, it doesn't matter so much, but I take your point, you know, but still, you know, one of my most extreme experiences was being in the fells. And I was let off by these friends, and I only had 5 miles to walk to the cottage where I was staying, and I decided to go up on the fells and walk down, you know, so it would take about 20 miles across the, what was then Westmoreland,
yeah.
And these scars, you know, these limestone scars and these flats and everything. Well, I was caught in a snowstorm. And it was night. And I, you know, to some extent the nature's there. It's just how you approach it. You know, like if you go to the East Coast and those rocky cliffs, Northumbria, in that area, around Lindisfarne, you know, you can really push yourself into some areas where, you know, that tide, you don't have to go out there now because the tide's coming. Oh, I think I'll just wait and see what happens. You know, that kind of instinct to wait and see what happens.
So what is it in virgin nature then? Is it a sense of our own fragility and mortality?
Well, that's what they
inspires,
thought.
or is it just the fact of God's creation being there unmediated and unsullied by human interference?
Surely it's a bit of both, isn't it? You know, because as you, on the Sufi path, if I can use those terms, as you in some sense grow, you become smaller and smaller, and hopefully you eventually disappear. And you die before you die. You disappear. And it's only the immensity and God's creation. You don't need to be an I. You don't need to be an ego. You're completely satisfied with the whole of existence there. It feeds you automatically. And I think that's what we feel. I mean, the English poets like Lord Byron talked about the sublime in terms of this feeling of and Burke, and also Kant as well. The sublime being this feeling that you are small in this universe. But they tended to see that in a kind of terrifying way. But I watched a film called The Incredibly Shrinking Man. Did anyone ever see this film? It's a 1950s American film. The man takes the wrong kind of drug, and he starts to get smaller and smaller. And his wife and family desert him as he gets smaller and smaller. And he finally has to fight a spider. And he comes out in the grass at the end. And he's totally at peace in the forest of the grass. He's accepted it. He's accepted his minusculeness. When I worked as an orderly intensive care unit, I saw people die, and I saw some people being willing to accept that they're part of this universe, but they don't necessarily have to be a physical presence in the universe. Does that?
Yep. So does the Sufi sheikh play a similar galvanic role as virgin nature, or is it a different trigger?
Well, they do talk about a second childhood, don't they? And I think there is an innocence from wisdom. I don't see the two in complete opposition by any stretch of the imagination. The Sufi sheikh will allow a lot of things to happen, and then he will challenge you. You use the term virginal. He's pure as far as a human being can be. Though the greatest human being was Muhammad alayhi salam. And he once said to Aisha, I don't have an ego, you have an ego. So I know I have an ego. I know I have something inside me that opposes this journey. So there's some negotiation that has to take place there. There has to be something. And the Sufi sheikh, to me, helps me because, in a way, when you go to a lecture, no matter how good the lecture is, when you leave the room, the lecturer is not going to go with you. But with a Sufi sheikh, he is going to go with you. When he makes a commitment to help you, it's forever. Understand? He comes with you. He leaves with you. He has gained that power. Recently, I was in India in a very funny apartment block, and you could call it innocence, Sheikh. You could call it innocence. I don't know what the word really is. It's spiritual power, presence. And they were lauding me and thinking I was, great and all this. And I was in this very strange apartment that you went up one set of escalators, lift, and then you went across to a floor, and then you went up another lift to the next. In this little place, this father said, put your hand on my son. And suddenly I thought, not my hand, my sheikh's hand. And there it was. There was Sheikh Nazim's hand, not my hand. Now I can't do that. Another sheikh I met looked at me and he took his face off. I can't do that. Can any of you take your face off? Have you had a try recently? He took his face off in front of me. There's a power there. Where that power comes from, When I was a Christian, I met many good people. But I met my sheikh before I met him, physically. I met him before I met him. You understand? And it was a power and a holiness I could not dismiss. I could not ignore it. And that, to me, maybe it comes out of closeness to the creation, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through practice, through meditation, through contemplation, through what? Through struggle. And without knowing it, without really expecting it, suddenly there just is an opening. And you're a different person. It's like Alice in Wonderland. I don't know who I am today. I've changed quite a few times. And really not knowing who you are is a good thing. Because it means you're still open to this process. Does that make any sense, Sheikh? I don't know.
Sort of joining up those thoughts, could we perhaps say that the function of nature is to remind us that we are only at home with nature when we have a relationship to transcendence, whereas the presence of the sheikh is there to show us what we need to be in order to be like that?
Yes, that's fine, yes.
So they're kind of complementary, they're not just
He
doing
always
the
said,
same job.
know nature, be with nature, get into nature,
Yep.
go out into nature. And there's no doubt that is quite healing and inspiring. But there are people in the world who can't get into nature. They're disabled. They can't leave their room. They can't leave their bed.
After 2004, did your view of nature and how it inspired your writing change?
Islam has changed my writing, definitely. I feel it's more humane, contrary to all the jihadists and people going around shooting and everything. I feel the humanity of Muhammad alayhi salam, and the fact that he's a human being had profound influence on me. But again, it's not something I can easily map. I can just see that, looking in hindsight, I can see the alterations, but I can't really map how that happened to us.
So it's more than just giving you a vocabulary with which to express feelings that you'd more dimly intuited before? It's a deeper change than that?
It's deeper than that, yes. It's deeper.
Is there something
I think the most important thing was that it gave me a confidence that I should write these things, that I shouldn't be frightened, I shouldn't be thinking I'm not worthy, or I shouldn't be thinking it's all been said before better. I think with meeting the Sheikh, I got a feeling that really I should do what I can do. I shouldn't hold back.
And is there, on the basis of that not holding back, a kind of poetic mountain that you feel you should climb that you're not ready for yet? Is there a topic or a theme or a half-grasped poem that you're waiting for the right time to tackle?
Yes, and that's a risky business, waiting for the right time when you're 74. I think I'll write that one in heaven. Well, yes, I think so, but I can't really put it down to something I think I can't write about. What I know is that always a new experience can come along and shake me, shatter me, and that I have to deal with it. And that's where inspiration often comes from. Ever since I lost my granddaughter in 2012, became estranged from her, that has become a powerful source of trying to understand that, trying to. So I know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can just throw something in front of me any second, any time, and I will have to respond to it. And that I find, yes, challenging. Yeah. I don't know what yet I can write.
I think Alia's starting to furrow her brows at me. It's been a really good conversation. Really grateful to Abdul Wudud and his team for coming down today, and the new book and a few selected highlights from previous books are on sale.
Cambridge Muslim College, training the next generation of Muslim thinkers.